So without further ado, I'll introduce Britton. I didn't print out your bio.
It's all right.
So sorry.
No need.
Tell everybody about yourself.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, many thanks to Sarah Johnson for all of her hard work getting the speaker series up and running each fall and spring. I'm always really excited when we have the topic come together and find some great people to talk about these different things that are near and dear to our hearts. Nothing is nearer or dearer to my heart than this house that I'm going to talk about, because John, my husband, and I live in it, and we've been doing a lot of work on it since we moved there, or I guess I should say we've been having a lot of work done on it. This is a really important moment for me to be giving this talk, because it's the culmination of my 15 years of study here at Yestermorrow. I've taken a lot of classes here before being a staff member, for being a teacher and a staff member. So it's really exciting for me to have been able to apply all the things I learned. And I credit the house with giving me the tool to learn all the things, but I really credit Yestermorrow for giving me all of the instruction on so many topics that I needed to know when we bought this house back in 2012. It's also the convergence of several topics that I really care about, and that is, one of those is the deep energy retrofitting of buildings, so making buildings much more energy efficient, especially houses and aging houses, and especially mid-century modern houses. Hey, and then also combining the retrofitting and the deep energy efficiency upgrades, combining that with preservation of the character of the modern house is a really important thing to me. I lived in an Eichler house when I was a really little kid out in California, and Eichler was a developer of very simple, modern, beautiful, lots of glass, Bay Area, California, so it suited the climate really well. But I like to think that the groundwork was laid really early with me to love modern dwellings. I also want to just thank a few people who helped me get here. John, of course. We were on this journey together, and a funny little anecdote, actually, a lot of people give me all the credit for all of the taste decisions in the house, and that is false. John has done more than I have, at least in terms of the furniture and the art, and a lot of the aesthetics, and then that leaves me to be able to do the stuff that you hopefully don't notice and you don't see, the insulation and whatnot. So I have to call that out. Also, I have to mention a couple of people. Kinney Perot, Robin Morris, Monica DiGiovanni, and Jeff Shelkoff were the very first people I spoke to when I came to Yestermorrow. I think it was 2009. And they were the ones when I said, I'm an architect who was just laid off from a job, and all I know what to do with a hammer is to hang a picture. And they were like, you need to come to Yestermorrow, and so I did about a month later, and I've never looked back. Also, Laura Cavan-Bailey, who used to work at Bill McClay's office and now works for Vermont Council on Rural Development, thank you. She's an architect who has gone on to bigger and better things. But Laura was my mentor on figuring out the details for this project. And Yestermorrow used to have a program that I was a part of where we would take a lot of different classes as electives and then apply them all toward a project. And this is what I did, this house is what I did as my project. And then it assigns you a mentor who can help you work out the details and help you along in the process. And so Laura was that for me. I meant to have a copy of the book that she wrote with Bill McClay called The New Net Zero, and it's a fantastic, very interesting, big book with great details and great examples in it. It's still a really good resource. Building science knowledge is changing quickly. Speaking of, here's Laura. I was just singing your praises for having helped me through this process. So thank you, Laura. It's nice to see you. Building science changes quickly, and the technologies of the materials change, and so it's an ever-evolving field. And so I feel like I could keep taking classes here at Yestermorrow, keep working with people like Laura to understand it all. But I highly recommend the new Net Zero book. And then also I want to call out Francis Falaise, who's here in the audience, Vermont Pro Construction, who was very deeply involved with us on one of the phases of this project that I'll be showing, and it was the most significant phase that we've done to date. So anyway, enough of all of that. This is a little bit of how I'm going to go through it. I'm going to try not to bore you for too long, but I am going to go a little into the history of the design and some context, and then take you into where, when John and I took over the house, or as I like to say it, the house found us, and then go through some of the details and where we ended up. Here's an early drawing of the house by the architect Rem Huygens. Huygens and Tepe was an architecture firm in Boston, and it's since gone on to become two separate firms. DeMella and Schaefer is where Rem Huygens went, and Tepe went on to be Tepe and Associates. They did the addition to, what's the nice museum in Ridgefield, Connecticut? Yeah, Aldrich. So they went on to do more institutional, and DeMella and Schaefer does all types of projects. But early in their career, they did a lot of residential. And Rem Huygens was Dutch. He actually designed boats. And so I think a lot of his projects are really weather sensitive. He worked for Marcel Breuer early in his career. He was highly influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright's thoughts about a building being of the site. All of his projects, I like to think of them hugging the site or being very intimately connected to the site. He was known for his asymmetrical roof lines, angles, geometry, and minimal overhangs. He had a really common theme of repetition of angularity and low scales to give an impression of shelter and informality. He often used materials that were very similar to other historic buildings in the area. So cedar shingles for his houses on the Cape, clapboard siding for his houses in rural New England. And here are just a couple of other drawings of other houses of his from around New England. And here are a couple of the houses built. I believe this one's in Marblehead, Massachusetts. This one is in Darien, Connecticut. You'll see right next door there's a Richard Meyer house, if anyone knows that architect. They both worked in Marcel Breuer's office early in their careers. And it's interesting that they both, at the exact same time, were building houses out on their own in Darien, right on the water. And then here's a house of Rem Huygens in Cape Cod. This one in particular reminds me a lot of our house, especially with that massive chimney. He often put a big chimney right up the center of the house, and then the movement of the house was around that chimney mass. I mentioned the preservation of modern architecture. Modernism is really important for people to understand. In my mind, because of the connection to nature, because of the honesty of materials, because of the expression of the technology that came out of the time after World War II. So even though I think it's really important, it's also really under threat because a lot of people don't love it, and because it doesn't necessarily cater to a climate as harsh as northern New England. It's suited really well to England or Seattle or Southern California or the Bay Area. So to me, it's been really important to find a way to adapt the mid-century modern architecture and what I love about it, but make it work in our very harsh climate that sees much higher temperatures in the summer and much, much colder temperatures, as you all know because you live here, temperatures in the winter, and with humidity at all of those times. A housing type that was done in our area before, that was adapted since the 1600s, is the salt box, and named after the old wooden salt box form, and then a building type matched it. Often it was a basic colonial that had an addition put on at the back that made it down to 1 story, and again, a center chimney, sort of like the modern Rem Huygens version, but here a 1600s to 1900s version with a center chimney and a lot of movement around it. And the salt box gave you a lot more floor area on the ground floor for families. But what's really interesting to me is our house is not traditional at all, and yet it is a salt box in section. And it even functions the way a salt box did, where there are the bedrooms on the upper level, and then the big chimney that goes up right through the center, and then living spaces and the entry all happen on the single story part. So, but I'm going to get into the design a little bit more now. The house was built in 1964. Now we've moved on to John's and my house. Built in 1964, and in 1967, House Beautiful came and took some photographs of it and wrote a little article. It was one of 4 wonderful holiday houses in a Christmas issue of House Beautiful, which I think is kind of fun. I should have shown you photos of all the different houses. They're pretty funky and interesting, a whole variety. But John and I love that ours was one of those 4 wonderful holiday houses. And I also love that even though it's in section, it's a salt box, in plan, it's a hexagon. So it has 6 sides, and I love that they took the opportunity to show 6 different elevations. They went all that way. And then this is our living room window facing Sugarbush. And in the 60s, the trees were a lot smaller than they are now. Our house is in an old apple orchard. But now it feels much more like it's in a spruce and fir forest. And then these are the interior photographs of the house from the House Beautiful article. Lots of built-in furniture. A house with 6 sides and no square corners typically needs built-in furniture because a lot of furniture has square corners. Even the coffee table, we actually have 2 of them, were designed to fit a hexagon, not a square. And then there's a really neat bunk room, is the room over there, with 4 built-in beds, 3 twins and a queen. So a family of 5 can all stay in this tiny little bunk room. And funnily enough, John's sister and her husband and 3 kids have all stayed in that room. Although I don't think many people, they didn't sleep much. Lots of yelling at each other. And then this is the primary bedroom. This is our bedroom with a fireplace upstairs and a tiny little window. Here's the floor plan. We've got the main area. I'll show some plans later, and then the 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms upstairs. And then this calls it a bunk room downstairs, which is interesting. It's where we have exercise equipment in my office. And then we have a really nice sauna situation, and it's a walkout basement. So then these are the architect's drawings. We love that we have the original blueprints. There's that salt box section again, and the 3 floor plans of the 3 levels of the hexagon. There are the elevations. This is the west-facing elevation, a 2-story wall of glass facing the view of Sugarbush. It's located off in East Warren on the west-facing slope of East Warren. So we have views of Sugarbush, Mount Ellen, and Mad River Glen. So the view is great, but a 2-story wall of glass facing west isn't necessarily great because it's really hard to control that hot western summer sun as it's setting. It's really beautiful, but it also can be really hot. That's probably the design challenge that I've struggled with the most and have not solved. But I'll be talking about some of the other design challenges that hopefully I did solve with Laura's, John's, Francis's, Yestermorrow's help. These are some of the details of the existing house, which are pretty interesting. this is our roof section, which is the key one that I want to point out because that's critical to our primary deep energy retrofit. You'll notice that in this little drawing, I don't know if everyone is used to reading architectural drawings, they can be pretty cryptic, I know, but what I'll point out is there's no cavity here. There aren't typical roof joists, like little beams, with insulation in between. In the 60s and 70s, there was a strong trend to build with what was called a structural deck. So it's basically a 3 or 3.5 inch or 4 inch thick tongue and groove pieces of wood that all lock together, and that's your structural span. And all of that sits on a heavy wood frame. So almost like a timber frame, but it's post and beam because it has steel connections, not peg connections. We teach a lot of timber framing classes here. It's not quite that old world, but what that means is it ends up with, there's no cavity to put insulation. And so what they did for our house was they put a decent layer of rigid insulation on top. And then they put cedar shake shingles on top of that. So, I think for the 60s, it was probably a good gesture at, oh, I'm a Boston architect, Vermont's a really harsh climate, I better give them some insulation. By the 2010s, it was not enough. Let's just put it that way. And our heating system, when we bought the house, was a electric baseboard heating system. So let's just say the first weekend we were there, no one had been there, and so we turned the heat on. By the time we left after the 3-day weekend, it was almost up to the temperature where you didn't need your coat on when you were inside. And I won't go into the cost of heating it for those 3 days, but it wasn't cheap. So insulation and the changing technologies of insulation and the changing prices of electricity and the changing code from the 60s to now all had a pretty strong influence on my decision making for how to change the house's design, and had a lot of influence on the way Francis and I and John solved these problems. Here are some interior elevations. The kitchen, again, no right angles, so everything had to be built in and custom. We got really lucky when we bought the house that it seemed to be very well built. We haven't been able to figure out who the original builder was. It wasn't part of the Prickly Mountain movement that happened around the same time, 63, 64, 65, a couple of miles south in Warren. So it wasn't part of that. It was a much more specific architect design, hire a builder for someone from Boston. And then here are some designs for that massive chimney that goes up through the middle. There's the sauna design and some other details. Luckily, we even had plumbing plans, structural plans, electrical plans, and that one on the lower right is the electrical heating plan. But anyway, that brings us to 2012 when, as I said, the house found us and adaptation began. I say it found us because when we looked at it, it was in pretty rough shape. It had been the same owner the entire time, the entire 50 plus years, and he had passed away and left the house to some relatives who didn't live anywhere nearby. It was right after Hurricane Irene, and so I think people weren't looking at real estate in the valley. The house had been on the market for a long time. They hadn't paid property taxes for several years. And it was starting to, water and nature were starting to win. This section of the roof had completely fallen off. This was a generous real estate photo because when we got there, that whole section of the roof was lying in the lawn. You'll notice these big shrubs and trees right up against the foundation. their roots had grown into the foundation drainage and clogged all of it. And so one of the first things I remember learning when I took my class at Yestermorrow was, what do builders call a full basement in Vermont? An indoor swimming pool. Well, that's what we had, except it was only about 6 inches of water, but there was a lot of water in our basement, and we had to take the risk when we bought it that we would figure out how to fix it. It was basically being sold as is. So the two major things were the roof having fallen off and the finished basement having quite a bit of water on it. But also, it's sort of hard to tell in these photos, but the grade of the lawn sloped right into the back of the house. And when they plowed the snow of the driveway comes from over here. They were plowing the snow and piling it right behind the house. This is the eastern upslope of the house. And so that whole one-story part of the house was completely rotten and falling down. So we walked in the front door. There was a hole in the roof. The ceiling was falling in. It smelled terrible because of all the moisture. And then we tried to go down to the basement and realized we needed our wellies to be able to walk through it. So our real estate agent said, yeah, you can tear this down. It's a beautiful lot for a great view of Sugarbush to build. I think he even said the word Center Hall Colonial. So needless to say, we did not do that. There I am with my mother, my brave mother, walking across this little gangplank on a Memorial Day weekend with the crab apples and apple trees blooming in the background. But we excavated the entire foundation, and we were not surprised what we found. It was old clay footing drain tiles that were all clogged with roots. We couldn't even get the roots out. They were so jam-packed full of roots, because the roots go where the water is, and the water was in those tiles. And then we were glad to find that it was actually a really substantial foundation, and it was in really good shape structurally. There's this seam of ledge that comes right across here, and so the foundation basically steps down over that, which creates the full basement here. This is a slab on grade here, and then this is all the area that we had to regrade to get the grade away from this part of the house, where all the rot was happening because the dirt and snow and everything were getting pushed up against this part of the house. And yes, that's where the electrical lines enter the house too, so not a great recipe. And then the other thing I want to point out is I mentioned the wonderful architect, Rem Huygens, and one of his signatures was no overhangs. And he detailed his houses really carefully with this little knife edge detail so that you really don't perceive the roof. Well, in Vermont, that was one of the other things I learned in my Yestermorrow classes, in addition to an indoor pool in the basement, is when you have no overhangs, your siding weathers terribly and very quickly. And so you can see exactly all this water's flying down when the roof is intact. By this point, our builder had fixed the roof for us. This is prior to us knowing Francis. But look at how the water has run down these walls and is just destroying. We had to completely replace all of this siding. But we put a stepped perforated pipe foundation drainage all the way out, draining to daylight. Luckily, we're on a slope, so it has plenty of gravity to pull it right away from the house. And to this day, 13 years later, it's a steady flow of water all the time. There's so much water coming down the hillside here. I grew up in Colorado. I've never seen this much water come out of the ground in my entire life as in Vermont. So anyway, we tried to keep as many of the details about the house that we loved as possible, things that you may have noticed in the House Beautiful article. One of the things we just did subtle changes. There was a big piece of plywood blocking this stairway down to the basement, and you entered the stair from a little side opening, and that blocked all the light. So we took that plywood off so that you could see right through the stairs that go up. Dogs hate it, but for everybody else, it's really nice. Our dog has adapted to it. And we basically then just piece by piece really tried to touch up every part of it with painstaking paint, stain, etc. You'll notice all the icicles, and actually these aren't as bad as it would get sometimes, but we would get huge icicles on all the drip areas of the house, which was a sign that there was a lot of heat loss through the roof, which was melting the snow from below, and then it was, if it hadn't slid off, it was dripping off, which is a classic Vermont scenario, even with standing seam roof. At some point along the way, they had replaced the cedar shake roof with a standing seam metal roof. It wasn't all that well installed, which is why some of it had fallen off into the lawn. But here are just some more photos of the house after we bought it, when we were getting things pulled together. We did a lot of landscaping. I do as much landscape architecture as I do architecture, and I love gardens and gardening. And our little city place down in New Haven didn't have any outdoor space, so I really loved having a place where I could do landscaping. We kept as much of it intact from the original design as we could, and tried to make sure that we were celebrating all the original details. When we moved up full time, we did what I call phase 2. So phase 1 was stem the bleeding, get the water to try to keep the water out, even though water will always win. But do our best to keep the water on the outside of the building. Phase 2 was make it a little bit more livable. We put in a washer dryer, we put in new appliances and plumbing fixtures and countertop. And then we lived like that for a little bit. Oh, and I forgot to mention, we put in a new heating system. We put in Rinnai propane heaters. They took care of the heat a lot better than those electric baseboard. They're much more efficient. They're a pretty traditional heating system for Vermont and other cold climates. They're not ideal. They're using propane. I would love to eventually be fossil fuel free in this house. We're not there yet. But that brings me to phase 3, which was around 2020, and that's when we met Francis. Francis came in and did this thermal imaging of the house. This was done in March, so it was still during heating season. And it's pretty fascinating to see. The photo on the right, it's probably really hard to see, but that's in our bedroom. And so that's looking up at the ceiling, which is also the underside of that really thin roof that you saw in that detail. And the darker the color is, the colder. So that's looking out where there's a window, and then this is the roof. So we've got a lot of heat loss through this roof. So this is from the inside. So when you're looking at the inside, the purple is bad. And then this one's from the outside. This is looking up at that big 2-story wall of glass. And so when you're outside, you're seeing the heat loss come through. So bright yellow is bad from the outside. And so what's really interesting to me is a few things. Even from the 60s, they had insulated glass at the time. So these windows are all insulated glass. This one is not. This is single pane glass. So look at how much heat is pouring out of that single pane metal framed glass. And then the other thing is, look at the concrete foundation. So we had a finished basement, but it had 6 inches of water in it when we bought it. So our builder in that early phase just took all the finishes and the insulation and everything out of the basement. And so what that meant is now with a heated basement, we have a lot of heat loss through that concrete. Concrete doesn't insulate at all. Wood insulates a little bit. One, they call it R1 per inch. So there's a little bit of resistance to heat loss in wood. There's none in glass or in concrete. Insulated glass insulates a little bit because it has air. The glass isn't doing anything, it's the air between the glass that's doing something. So anyway, phase 3, Francis entered the picture, took these thermal images. A Yestermorrow class did a blower door test, which showed us where, that's when they force air into the building, and then they force air out of the building, out of a door, and then they measure where the cold is coming in the most. And so we found the cold air leakage was actually happening the most right along the top of the concrete wall where it met the sill of the wall framing. So I did some design work, did some SketchUp, did some hand drawing, used a whole variety of tools to try to understand how to fix this. I started working with Laura. Laura had actually done a little bit of similar work on her own house, which was of a similar age and similar construction type. Is that true? Yeah. At least the roof, yeah. And we established our goals on the project for phase 3, and that really was, number one, stop the roof leaks. We were having major roof leaks in one little area, even though we'd done some repairs, and then stop or reduce the heat loss, reduce the air leakage. And then we also wanted to add some natural light and just make the project more resilient, make the house last longer. Even though it has that big two-story wall of glass facing west, it has very few other windows. And so if the house can feel really, or used to feel really dark. So I drew elevations, added a few windows here and there. And then we redid the dormer upstairs. There was a very small dormer here, just a tiny little window in the bedroom. And the way that the valleys worked around this chimney, rain, snow, ice, everything got stuck behind the chimney and then ran down the face of the chimney on the inside of the house, rather than going around. So as much as I love mid-century modern architecture, as much as I love Rem Huygens and his designs, there were a few flaws that I felt we could make better. And talking to Francis and kind of working with his team on solutions, we found that instead of a small, almost a cricket kind of a dormer behind the chimney, we should make a shed dormer that it's not a flat roof, it's a very slightly sloped roof, so it still sheds water, but it doesn't create an opportunity for everything to get trapped behind that. It sheds both directions away from the back of the chimney and then off the end. In Vermont, with the snow that we have, and in any snowy climate, if a house was designed in the 60s with the amount of insulation you have, the structural people knew that it was going to melt most of the snow that sat up there because you have all this heat loss through the roof. If you're planning on putting a lot of insulation on your roof, you have to allow for a much more substantial structure, because you're going from probably very little snow staying on the roof to potentially all the snow that falls staying on the roof. Now, ours is a pretty steeply sloping roof. Luckily, we're not a mid-century modern with a flat roof. That was another thing I learned when I took Yestermorrow classes in Vermont, is flat roofs are really, really problematic. Slight slopes, okay. Totally flat, bad. So we don't have that. We've got pretty good sloping, so a lot of the snow will slide off. We don't want gutters because the snow sliding off will just rip the gutters right off. But we still had to upgrade the structure to be able to handle the snow that could potentially stay on the roof a lot longer. And it's pretty significant weight. I think, is it 70 pounds a square foot that you have to, 100 pounds per square foot. So Francis connected us with a structural engineer, Chris Temple from DeWolf, who was fantastic. And he analyzed our structural drawings, came to the house, looked at everything, and he came up with this really great idea of using the beams that we had, and he liked that structural deck system we had. He's seen that before. He said that was acceptable, but the beams were just undersized. And in fact, he could see that they were actually bending already. And so his design was for these, what are called flitch plates, which are steel plates that are fabricated to match the sizes of the beams, and then they're bolted into the beams. And one of my favorite parts of the whole process was watching Francis and his team use basically giant jacks to get the beams back to, if they're doing this, to get them back to this, and then bolting the steel through. And only when the steel was held up against the beams could you really perceive the bowing of the wood. And one of the beams had actually failed. It had checked. It had like cracked all right down the middle. So they were stressed as it was. And then if we were going to be putting a lot of insulation on, the insulation and the material has a little bit of weight, but then all the snow has a lot of weight. So we had to do this, not all the beams in the house, but quite a few. And a really close Yestermorrow friend named Ben Cheney, who has a steel fabricating business, was able to, this is an old detail from the house, this steel connection, this is that post and beam structure that I mentioned earlier, and then this is the new flitch plate. So he was able to match the kind of character of the steel, which was really great and fascinating for me to see. So there again is the old, roof insulation and structure detail with no overhang. And then here's the new detail that Laura helped me come up with. Because we had no cavity, I couldn't just decide to fill it with something. So we had to think of rigid insulation. And I sort of did a cost comparison of rock wool, timber, it's called timber HP. It wasn't available at the time. We could have maybe gotten it from Europe, but it was incredibly expensive. It's now available. Might have been what we'd gone with, but it's also very expensive. What I went with was polyiso, which is a really high R per inch. It's a much lower carbon footprint than other foam insulation types, and it's fairly affordable. So it has a couple of downsides. It loses R value in the cold. So the R value is much stronger when it's closer to our house, and it's probably going to be less out there, but at least it's still better than what we had, right? Other downsides, well, there's some waste. You have some, it's a petrochemical product. You have some petrochemicals that you're putting into a landfill when you cut it and have pieces of waste. So there were downsides, but for John and me, with our situation and working with Francis, we came to the conclusion that that was the best one for us to use. So here's the existing wood deck. We put 10 inches of polyiso, which is about R50. So we basically went from R3, 4, 5 to R50 in the roof. And then, as I mentioned, no overhang to 18 inches of overhang. This drawing also has a layer of rigid insulation added when we do our new siding. We didn't do that for budget reasons. We decided to wait to do that. That's phase 4 or 5. So we wanted to allow for overhang even when we do that thicker wall. And because, again, it's a structural deck, we couldn't just continue it to have it keep going because it has to rest on this wall, and it's not good at cantilevering out. So then we had to come up with a framing detail, which Francis and his team were really helpful to get us to be able to put an overhang out over there when we didn't originally have one. And then there's a ventilation space. It's a vented roof, and then you've got one last layer of plywood and the standing seam. So this roof has all this insulation and airspace, and so guess what? We never have icicles, not a single icicle. It's absolutely incredible. And now, whenever I think of the destruction that those icicles, when they would fall and scrape down the windows and scrape down the walls, now we don't even have them, and they're almost 2 feet farther away from the side of the house. So it's really great. Here's some shots while we were doing the work. This is the whole roof was open to the sky. It was pretty scary there for a little bit when it was just tarps keeping us dry through the night. What? No big rainstorms? Yeah, luckily. It was luckily not the Irene September. It was, or one of the last couple of years. And so here you can see this was the old roof line where I said all that rain got caught behind the chimney. And then this is the new roof line. So this part of the chimney used to be outside. Now it's inside the house. So our bedroom didn't grow in footprint, but it grew in volume. And instead of one tiny little window, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 windows. which really improves the feeling of the room. Here's that dormer, the new dormer being framed up from the outside. Here are a couple of looking the two directions in the bedroom. A lot of the roof had to come off. There were mushrooms growing in parts of it. There was so much moisture in there. I think another part of the building science is that it had been designed to have that cedar shake shingle, but as soon as they put standing seam metal on top of it, the moisture just went to under that standing seam metal and condensed and then just soaked into the wood. So that was why it was really important to me to have this vent space, because I didn't want moisture. Moisture eventually will get through any assembly, but I didn't want it collecting on the bottom of the roof and rotting all of our material, as it was actively doing when we started this project. So there is the first kind of view of, you can see the overhangs, you can see the new roof layers being put on. We were living there the whole time. I think Francis said after that he would never do a project where the people are living there again. You didn't stick to your word. I don't blame you, but I thank you for dealing with it. You can see the thickness difference in this photo. So where the blue is basically the plane of the old roof, and then way up there is the plane of the new roof. So this isn't a true restoration or preservation project. It is substantially different. But I think it looks wonderful, and I think it'll last a lot longer. I've been a little bit nervous in some of these big windstorms that now there's something for the wind to catch if it's going to hit. But I know we put a lot of good hurricane tie type things in. And so this is just sort of a little progression of half done, mostly done, and fully done. And then right on that surface, you'll see right there our solar panels, photovoltaic panels. So we wanted to have a place for those to go, but we didn't want them out in the field. We also added a couple of windows. These, to me, were the most important windows for us to add, because these ends of the house, this is the kitchen, this is the living room, were very dark. And a lot of times I feel like I would be in the kitchen and John would say, oh my gosh, there's an amazing sunset. I love to bake, so I'm often in the kitchen. He'd be like, oh, there's an amazing sunset. And I would have no clue because I'm in this dark kitchen. Well, now I can see all the sunsets and the birds, and it's great. Here's another view of that big overhang construction that we put on. So where that blue line is, that's the old roof line. And then here are some that show a little bit. We chose a natural cedar eave, and then this was the color of the house that we kept. It's Benjamin Moore Deep Space. It's not quite black, not quite blue, not quite gray. And then there, from inside, we were afraid that the overhang would really block the windows, but I think we both feel that we just love them. And I kind of like looking up all the natural wood inside, and then you see some of the natural wood outside. Here's right when you walk up, step onto the front porch. There's the bedroom dormer up there, and then the lower level. How am I doing on time? I told you I wasn't going to go too long. Obviously, I love this house. I could talk about it forever. I'll try not to bore you all too much more. But here's the bedroom in its finished state. Much more light, much more air. And then we were also able to make our closets bigger just by using space above, which is a nice access. Here are those windows from inside. This is the kitchen view that I was talking about, being able to look out. There's Mount Ellen. And then sitting in the living room, having another one. The house is very symmetrical, even though it's a hexagon, so I wanted to have those match on either side of that big 2-story wall. And then this is what the daylight now looks like in our living room. It's just the sun kind of washes through. And I know I said Western light is hard to control, and that's a design I was struggling with. And now I added more Western-facing windows. Sorry, Laura. But the view, we live in Vermont for a reason, and part of that is the beauty and the connection to nature. And mid-century modern architecture is famous for its connection to nature, and so I really wanted to embrace that with the house. So one last thing to point out, I mentioned the photovoltaic panels that we put on the roof. We also put in Tesla Powerwall, I wasn't even gonna mention that word, but the Powerwall batteries in our closet, so the solar charges those. And this was at 6:30 last night. They were producing 0.7 kilowatts, and almost all of that was going, or some of that was going to the grid, and then the rest of it was powering the house. And then if we have a power outage, they just store the power for us to use. And if it's sunny, we could go indefinitely. So to me, that's a real form of resilience. And that'll keep the house able to be going without broken pipes, without losing temperature. So next phase, phase 4, we really need to address this glass area, potentially insulate. I mentioned that insulated glass on the sides. For budget reasons, we didn't get to replace all that glass. So we need to do that, and we need to work on some insulation under there. Francis and I already have been talking about ideas there. And then phase 5, we need to insulate the basement. I mentioned, here's another view of that thermal camera that shows the heat loss through the glass, through the chimney, interestingly, because we must have had a fire in the chimney, in the fireplace, and then through the concrete there. So here's the kind of span, the design in the early 60s, as built in 64, when we bought it in 2012, and today. That's it. Thank you all very much for listening. Happy to entertain questions if you have any. As I said, I could talk about this house forever, so. Yep.
How did they, it's a clapboard siding.
Mm-hmm.
How did they join it at the outside? That's really slick.
It was very well built. They're alternating. They're not mitered, so they don't each come to a point, but they're alternating, but then it's a complex cut, so 2 angles. Yeah. It's like so you have every other one, you see the end grain from this side, and then every other one you see the end grain from this side. But yeah, and it's a very narrow clapboard, so it's, you could see in some of those photos where Francis and his team kind of wove in the new siding. It has a slightly different texture. At some point, we'll replace all the siding and have it all be new. But, renovation versus new construction, there is a lot of work you have to put into a renovation, but I still believe that it's worth keeping as much of the material in a house as possible. And for energy reasons, we would love to add the wall thickness and more insulation in the walls. But we couldn't quite justify the cost or the material throwing away the siding when it still had some life left. So, yeah, good question. That's people who really know construction really notice that little detail of the siding. Yeah.
Were they cut in place or cut on the saw and then brought to place?
On the saw.
Yeah.
So replicating is
Once you get the angle set on your saw, it's probably okay, but it's getting
keeping the line.
right, right.
So kudos to the prior builder.
Yes, and to the latest one.
Well, I missed what year you did the roof insulation. How many winters have you gone through with the new insulation?
Was it done in 21 or 22? I think it was done in 21. So I think we've had 2 or 3 winters at least. And
I had my child after, so at least 3.
oh, at least 3 winters, yeah.
Have you done your energy use comparisons before and after?
No, I need to do that, and I know it's the obvious part of this that I'm not including. All I know is that Bourne's Energy, our gas company, called us and they said, "Did you move out? Like, you're not using the gas that you used to use, and so we're going to have to adjust your contract." And I think we've been in a credit with them for more than a year. So our propane usage is way down. We have no icicles. It's amazing to have the snow falling off the roof, not piling against the house, but actually be, because even though we did only an 18-inch overhang, which some people said do 2 or 3 feet, but we didn't want to go that severe with this design. But even the 1.5 feet, the snow goes away from that, and it's a 1.5 feet this way, and then the roof is this thick, so it's at least 2 feet that everything is falling away from the house. And especially this wall of glass here, you can only imagine those icicles that were hanging down in front of these windows, hitting these windowsills. I don't know how this glass all didn't break from the ice impact. And now, no moisture ever touches any of that unless it's a really horizontally wind-driven rain. It's really fascinating.
Britton and John, can you describe the airflow in the warmer weather? Do you open the windows and
Yes.
breezes go through?
We don't have any air conditioning. We do, so these two sides, this big wall of glass doesn't open, but these two sides all open up. And then this is a bathroom, and then the bedroom on the other side. And then we have windows under these eaves. And then that bedroom, these windows in the bedroom all open now. So, and there's a little opening, actually, it's hard to see. The stairway is right behind this wall here, and there's an opening here, so some heat can come up the stairway and then go right out that window. I think the temperature that I've noticed, the temperature difference that I've noticed the most, because you don't necessarily notice the heat loss, or the bedroom stays really warm in the winter because we're up against this highly insulated roof. But what I've noticed is the upstairs isn't hot in the summer at all. We used to have nights when we could not sleep in the bedroom because there was so much heat coming through the roof into the bedroom. And now the living room gets hot because it's got all that west-facing glass, but this east-facing bedroom is totally comfortable. So even on a still night, it's fine. We used to have to move to the basement for the summer, basically, and now we don't. And then if there's a breeze, then all these high windows in the bedroom really do a great job of venting any.
And I think that's where you should talk about the cold room system and the importance of
Yep.
that design and the simplicity of the vision of those. Because those in conjunction with each other allow the roof to perform optimally.
Yep.
Because one without the other does not perform correctly.
Right. So that's the metal roof with the airspace under it, and then a super insulation.
So the airspace is important.
The airspace is important. It's vent.
Not only for the warranty and performance of the material, but also comfort,
Comfort, right.
which is an important measure that we talk about a lot.
Exactly.
And more, even.
Right.
That's right.
Don't think about it.
Yeah.
And more, even in Vermont, the heating, the hot season, which is called the cooling season, it's becoming longer and longer and more of a reality. I think we were just talking to you all about that you have air conditioning. So resisting the heat from outside is becoming so much more of a reality than Vermont used to deal with. So.
On that note, the western glass, I know it might sort of break up the verticality of it, but is there any thought of making operable windows in that western facade for the next phase?
Operable, no. We really like that vertical, those really tall, and it has pretty deep fins, so the fins shade the glass a little bit. I think if anything, it would be some sort of shading device that could go down and then be, go away, whether inside or outside. To me, so that if we weren't in it and trying to see the view, we could shade the glass from getting hit by the sun. The fact that the two sides ventilate a lot means that area, and we've got that ceiling fan, and it's open to above, and so the air can vent out from in there. And those two sides of that glassy area, the windows operate even really up high, so heat can go out there. I don't think we would put. Francis, you were thinking, like, should we go bigger? Should we go operable? What? What'd you say?
I hope we wouldn't go with operable.
Wouldn't go with
Because
operable?
it would vision and the design would be lost.
And operable windows gain frame size, so our glass would shrink.
And also you touch upon the more of the modern windows.
Oh yeah,
We had specialty coatings put on them, so that we're anticipating the solar gain and trying to reflect that, and also their high U value. So we're looking to increase the thermal envelope, and also how we're managing heat coming into the building and wanting to keep it in there. It's definitely a fine balance. So a lot went into the windows as well.
Yeah, we ended up, so we replaced some of the existing windows we had, and then we had all these new windows that we were putting in, and I think I always assumed we would go with, there's a fiberglass type of Marvin window. Fiberglass outside, wood inside, or fiberglass outside, fiberglass inside. And what's that? Elevate, yeah. And I thought that's what we would do because it's a pretty good price performer, pretty more readily available than Marvin's more custom lines. But they couldn't, that frame type couldn't handle some of the window shapes and sizes that we did. So then we went and we shopped around, and Francis helped us look at a couple of different brands, Lowen, and then several of the Marvin lines. And we ended up with Marvin Modern, which is a pretty new addition to their product line, but we absolutely loved the frame, the minimal frame dimension, and the fact that it's incredibly strong and could handle these weird, large, expansive shapes, and it had thermal and reflective options that were as good as we could find, I think.
It lended itself to the design, plus the construction of the windows is such that it was, while you pay more in the short run, its long-term performance dramatically outweighed it because it's full clad construction. So definitely a worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah. And so I think we would stick with that for the rest of the house.
Are they triple pane windows or?
We decided for budget to stick with double. I don't think the house will ever get to net zero. The thickness we would have to put on the walls and the level of things that we might have to do, we decided not to shoot for quite that. Today, I would probably really try to do triple, looking back. But
Hard pill to swallow.
it's a hard pill to swallow, and
Is there condensation in the window?
no, none. Yeah. We also, I didn't mention, we replaced our front doors, and they were a 2.5 inch thick solid wood door, and we made those glass also, not Marvin, but Simpson. And those, because they're right in the kind of damp front mudroom, I think that you can tell a little bit of moisture on those, so maybe also the insulation's not, the quality of the seal and everything maybe not quite as good, I don't know, but.
Was the mudroom and entranceway in the original design?
Yes, there's an outside front porch and then an inside mudroom, and there used to be a door from between that mudroom and the heated part of the house, which energy-wise was a really good thing because it was like created like an airlock. But we ended up like our ski boots and our ski jackets and everything that we wanted to be warm, we then would have to bring into the house. And that negated the point of having the mudroom. So we took that door out. We made that decision during the pandemic shutdown when we were there 24 hours a day. And we were just like, you know what, this door is dumb, even though I know the reason it's there. So we took that door out, took the frame out, everything. And so now it's a heated mudroom. It's nice, yeah. It's nice to have everything be warm and dry in the mudroom instead of cold and still frozen. One of the things I love about this house is that it's very compact. It's less than 1,800 square feet, including the basement. Each level is about 600 square feet. But it's generously sized in the places where it matters, and then it's very efficient in the places where it matters. So our mudroom is quite spacious and has room for a lot of people. The sauna could hold probably 10 to 12 people. But the bedroom, there's just room for a king-size bed. And I guess that was a Rem Huygens signature, is the bedrooms are just for sleeping. Sort of the Frank Lloyd Wright idea, don't give them room to, put all this other junk around. But our kitchen is spacious, our bathrooms are spacious, our mudroom is spacious, the sauna is spacious. So in places where you might be congregating or moving around, and then that banquette in the living room, we have our office Christmas party there every year, and all 25 of us can find a place to sit, and it's pretty fun. So it works out.
Double height space for the Christmas tree.
And the double height space for the 2-story Christmas tree from the property, yep.
So are all your mechanicals in the basement?
Yes, there are very few mechanicals. So there are the two Rinnai heaters, one on the main level, one on the lower level, nothing on the upper level. It just, the heat rises into the space. The mechanicals are all in one closet. Is a hot water heater, which I think we're soon to go to a hybrid heat pump hot water heater. And then the well pump and the water filtration system. That's it. Yeah, so it's a pretty simple house. I think at some point we'll want to put in heat pumps to be able to heat and cool without using fossil fuels. I'm not exactly sure how we'll do that or where we'll put them, but I think we could probably do one in the upper level, kind of pouring some cool into that central 2-story space, and then one in the basement maybe. So.
Because you don't really have walls, that you can run.
Yeah. There's one triangular shaped chase in the entire house that all of the plumbing and everything from the upper level goes down right past the kitchen and out to the septic system. And so anything that runs vertically in the house has to go to that one little triangular shaped thing, which our plumbers just never can quite wrap their heads around. But because the floors also don't have any cavity, so the toilets are wall hung, everything goes into the wall and then goes down because the floor is that structural deck with no space in it. So nothing could go into the floor.
So your plumbing is in the exterior walls?
No, it's in an interior wall that goes to a triangular chase.
Because you haven't retrofitted the walls fully yet.
No, and that's one of the places where the design is really great for a pipe freezing thing, and that's something I always tell students is to really try not to put your plumbing in exterior walls. And ours doesn't have anything in the exterior walls. They're all like back to back of each other. The kitchen sink is on an exterior wall, but the plumbing doesn't go into the wall. It just travels right to that little chase within the cabinet itself. So, and it was a site-built cabinet. It wasn't like a box carcass that had to be fit around plumbing. So,
With the thin walls and floors, what's the noise situation? You hear each other walking around?
Yeah, you can hear a little, there's a little bit of, you can hear because it's this tongue and groove joint in the floor system, you hear a little bit of a creaking. I think one of the things we're going to do is put, in some areas we're going to put a cork floor down. That's one of the phases, like at least in the kitchen and some areas. And so I'll be interested how that, I love cork flooring.
I think the switch plate in the basement quieted down the main level.
Oh, that's true. There's a beam under the living room floor that goes right across the center of the house in the basement ceiling. And that was one of the major flitch plates we did. That was the beam that had completely broken and checked. And yeah, John's right. You walk up there and underneath you're like, ooh, where's, you like place where the person was walking, and now you don't hear them at all. So yeah, that's interesting. Good point. Well, thank you all very much for at least feigning some level of interest for this thing that I find fascinating. Yeah. I love telling you about it. And I, again, appreciate all the help we've received over the years from Yestermorrow, from Francis, from Laura. So, yeah.